Howdy y'all, Sharky here. In today's video, I'm going to be continuing with my series explaining how I caught every single Pokemon in their original region. If you didn't see the first video where I explained Generation 1, that video will be in the description. If you have any questions on how I caught some of these Pokemon or need any advice, please leave a comment and I'd be happy to go over that in more detail. Today we're moving on to Generation 2. I caught nearly all of these in Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, specifically in Crystal on the Virtual Console 3DS. Basically, Nintendo released all three games as virtual games on the 3DS. That's how I did it with Generation 1 in Yellow, Blue, and Red. But for these Generation 2 Pokemon, I caught them in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, specifically Crystal. You can also catch these Pokemon in the remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Before we get started, I like to give my opinion on these games, so here it is. I'm not extremely fond of this generation, just because it was one that I had skipped for the most part as a kid, so I don't have those rose-tinted glasses to influence my decision. I don't have a lot of nostalgia for Generation 2. My first Pokemon game was Generation 3, Pokemon Emerald, so I kind of skipped the first two generations. This was probably my third least generation to play, mostly because I just kept getting lost everywhere, and I'm just not super fond of any of the Pokemon in this generation. But nonetheless, there are some really great Pokemon scattered in here, and these are also really good games at the end of the day. I strongly recommend playing Heart Gold and Soul Silver if you're going to attempt this challenge, for reasons that I'll get into much later in the video, at pretty much the very end. I highly recommend playing Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and also it's important that you play a copy of Crystal as well. I'm sorry if you're a Generation 2 super fan, shout out to you Lucas, but these games are just not the best for me. However, like I said, it's still good games. This was also around the time in my life where I started documenting my Pokemon journey in a little notebook, so occasionally I'll be interrupting the video with what I had written in my notebook. For example, here, I started logging at which level some of these Pokemon evolve, some that I was having difficulties with, as well as my lack of motivation for completing this generation. Despite that, however, I did obviously complete Generation 2, and I will explain how I did it. Let's get into the Pokemon themselves and how I caught them. As a quick reminder, all of these Pokemon have my original trainer ID, Sharky. They all state they were caught in the Johto region. For the starter, I normally always select Totodile, just because he's goofy and I love him. So here are the starters: Chikorita, Bayleaf, Meganium, Cyndaquil, Quilava, Typhlosion, Hisuian Typhlosion, Totodile, Croconaw, and Feraligatr. A reminder from the last episode that you'll need to play through other games, a significant portion of a lot of other games, to catch some of these Pokemon, specifically the forms. For Hisuian Typhlosion, you need to play through a copy of Legends Arceus and evolve Cyndaquil up to Typhlosion. Luckily, Generation 2 isn't as bad as Generation 1 was about that. Plus, if you completed Generation 1, if you started at Generation 1, you should still have all those save files from those games that you played before. So it's pretty easy for grabbing the regional variants of the Generation 2 Pokemon if you played through those Generation 1 games. These starters are pretty easy to get and evolve. You just have to keep resetting. I reset Gold and Silver and then traded them over to my copy of Crystal. I named Feraligatr Big Booty because in the original sprite, he's pretty caked up. Photo on the screen now. Sentret and Furret, if you get the reference to Furret's nickname, that's an absolute classic, one of my favorite Pokemon songs. Feel free to leave a comment if you get the reference. These guys are early in the game and pretty easy to get. Hoot Hoot and Noctowl, shout out to Hooters. Lediba and Ledian. I can't remember why I named Ledian I Failed You, but apparently I must have either blacked out to a wild Ledian or forgot about him or something. I don't remember the full story. Spinarak and Ariados. Again, these guys are very easy to get early in the game. All of these guys are easy. I believe it's Crystal only, where these guys will show up only at nighttime if you set the clock, but it also might happen in Gold and Silver. I don't remember exactly. Crobat is our first friendship evolution in this generation, and apparently I had a lot of difficulty evolving him. On July 6th, I wrote, "Why won't my Golbat evolve?" Supposedly that must have been a frustrating day. Chinchu and Lantern. These guys are easy to fish up as long as you have a good rod or a super rod. Here we get into the newly introduced baby Pokemon. They're making their first appearance in this generation. Pichu, a shiny Cleffa, Igglybuff, and Togepi. These are all hatched from the odd egg that you can receive in Crystal, and I believe you can also receive it in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. If you want to get these guys the old-fashioned way, you'll need to restart your game after hatching every egg, just to make your way to the same spot where you grabbed the egg in the first place again. You basically have to reset the game to get the eggs. I don't like to do that. I'm super lazy. So what I did is I used an external tool to extract the egg from my save file and then reset before saving. If you think that's cheating, it probably is, but I don't really care because I felt like John Hammond from Jurassic Park, cloning eggs and then hatching them. Also, if it makes you feel any better, on August 16th, I wrote that I accidentally corrupted my Crystal save file, but I ended up fixing it later. If you didn't know about the shiny odds for the mystery egg in Crystal, it's a 14% chance to hatch a shiny Pokemon, which is extremely likely. In the Japanese versions of Pokemon Crystal, it's a whopping 50% chance for a shiny Pokemon. Luckily, as you can see, I got a shiny Cleffa from that. I named her Chuffle. I don't remember why. These aren't all the baby Pokemon in this generation, so the rest will be mentioned later. Togetic, Natu, Xatu, Mareep, Flaffy, and Ampharos up here. There we go. These guys are relatively easy to get. You get Togepi from an egg, and then it just evolves into Togetic. These guys are just route Pokemon, if I remember. Blossom, Marill, and Azumarill. These three Pokemon are easily some of my favorites in this generation, and just in Pokemon in general. I named Marill Pika-Blue because of a famous rumor that was being spread around at the time of Gold Silver release. There was a lot of promotional material that was being distributed about Gold and Silver, and Marill was one of the Pokemon that was prominent in the promotional material. Fans affectionately referred to this Pokemon as Pika-Blue, which is rather funny in my opinion. So I decided to name it Pika-Blue in a reference to that. Sudowoodo, the famous tree that you have to water to make him move. He's literally just a tree. Politoed, which is the new evolution of Poliwhirl. To evolve this Pokemon, you'll need to trade Poliwhirl while holding a King's Rock. As I mentioned in the Generation 1 video, some of these Pokemon are trade evolutions, so you'll either need 2 consoles and 2 copies of the game, or you'll just have to find a friend. Hoppip, Skiploom, and Jumpluff. I named Jumpluff Van Halen because of their song Jump, obviously. Shout out to Eddie. Rest in peace, King. Apom, I named after my friend Monk once again. Shout out to you in the comments, Chris. I know you'll be there. Love you, buddy. Sunkern, Sunflora, Yanma, Wooper, Paldean Wooper. Luckily, if you have the save file from the last generation, you'll already have a save file that's halfway through Scarlet or Violet, so this guy's very easy to pick up. Quagsire, Espeon, Umbreon. I named these both Bruno because I had an old coworker named Bruno who gave me an Umbreon pin, which I still have, but is unfortunately now broken. Murkrow, Slowking. I named him King Hank after New York Rangers legend Henrik Lundqvist, also known as the King. Galarian Slowking is a huge pain, unfortunately. It is only located in the Crown Tundra DLC in Pokemon Sword or Shield. So not only do you need one of those games, you'll need the DLC as well. You need to collect 15 Galarica twigs and trade them for a Galarica wreath. It's super complicated, but once you have access to the Crown Tundra, it's relatively okay. It's just annoying and expensive. Mischievous, Wobbuffet. I named her Rocket because famously Team Rocket uses a Wobbuffet in the anime. Girafarig, I named Palindrome because if you didn't know it, now you know it. Pineco, I named Sid Sloth because if you remember in Ice Age, he tries to convince the rhinos or whatever to eat pine cones. It's an inside joke in my family. We've been referencing it for a very long time. Fortress, Dunsparce. I don't even want to talk about you. Gligar, Steelix. I named Metallica because I love Metallica, obviously. I'll be showing some of my arm tattoos on screen for this next section because it's relevant, I promise. Snubbull, I named Ugly AF because, frankly, this dog is just disgustingly ugly. I'm sorry if you're a Snubbull fan. It's just repulsive, especially in the Detective Pikachu movie. It is a gross, gross Pokemon. Granbull, on the other hand, I named Yautja because of the famous creatures in the Predator movies. I believe I pronounced that right. But I loved the Predator movies growing up. I thought they kind of looked similar with the face mandibles. You can kind of see it there. Quillfish, Hisuian Quillfish, Sizor, which by the way is the coolest new evolution of Generation 2. Shout out to Sizor, he's awesome. Shuckle, Heracross. For some reason, I thought this was always a Generation 1 Pokemon. Am I the only one? Sneasel, Hisuian Sneasel, Teddiursa, Ursaring, Slugma. Don't mind the name of that. Magcargo, Swinub, Piloswine, Corsola, Galarian Corsola, Remoraid, Octillery, which, by the way, for a second, what is this evolution? A fish to octopus? How does that make any sense? Delibird, Mantine, Skarmory. I named this one Megadeth because the other Steel Pokemon is named Metallica, so I figured I'd name this Steel Pokemon Megadeth. I love both of these bands, despite them being somewhat rivals. Shout out to my Megadeth tattoo. Hell yeah. Houndour, Houndoom, Kingdra, Phanpy, Donphan. I named this one Blade because I think I watched the Blade movies for the first time while playing that day. Those are great movies. I love them. Porygon 2, Stantler, Smeargle. I named Van Gogh because he's my favorite painter. We're back into the baby Pokemon, so Tyrogue, Hitmontop, Smoochum, Elekid, and Magby, which, by the way, I just realized now is another shiny. Once again, these Pokemon are acquired from the Odd Egg, obviously except for Hitmontop. We'll get into you in a minute. Like I said previously, you'll either have to reset your save file over and over and over, or you can John Hammond like I did. If you want a tutorial on how I did that, feel free to leave a comment. I'd be happy to make a silly, stupid video about that. Hitmontop is honestly the second most annoying Pokemon in the world to evolve. Leave a comment if you know who's first. But Hitmontop is second. In Generation 2, Tyrogue can evolve into one of 3 Pokemon. Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, or Hitmontop. This is very complicated, so shuckle up. At level 20, Tyrogue will evolve. If Tyrogue's attack stat is less than its defense stat, it will evolve into Hitmonchan. If Tyrogue's attack stat is greater than its defense stat, it will evolve into Hitmonlee. Here's where it gets tricky. If Tyrogue's attack stat is equal to its defense stat, it will then evolve into Hitmontop. To get Tyrogue's attack stat and defense stat to be equal isn't extremely hard, but you do have to pay close attention. There's a lot of online guides, so I recommend watching one. It can be a little bit tricky, but I believe in you. Miltank I named Whitney for obvious reasons. If you haven't played the games, go play the games. And finally, the last normal Pokemon is Blissey. By August 18th, 2023, I still had around 45-ish Pokemon to collect, and I was feeling a little burnt out. But the motivation of catching Pokemon and seeing the number that I needed to catch go down was super worth it. I completed the game, headed into Kanto in Crystal, and caught some Pokemon such as Murkrow and Skarmory. Those are late game Pokemon that you need to catch. That reminds me, some of these Pokemon that I mentioned previously are only available in the post game, so you have to beat the game and then travel to the Kanto region in Generation 2 to catch them. The 3 legendary beasts are very tricky to get in these games. I believe you can actually glitch your game out and have them no longer appear, so you can easily soft lock your game out of getting them. Make sure you do not save the game if you knock them out or if they use the move Roar, otherwise you'll have to restart your entire save file to get them. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. I named Entei Papa because of the Pokemon movie. I love that movie. It was great as a kid. I used to rewind it. Slight tangent. I used to have it on VHS, and I used to have to rewind it all the way back. Man, shout out to us. Shout out to us kids that used to use VHSs back in the day. The pseudo-legendary Pokemon in this generation are Larvitar, Pupitar, and Tyranitar. These guys are pretty cool, but honestly not as strong as many other pseudo-legendaries later in the series. Lugia and Ho-Oh. I named this one Ash because famously Ash sees a Ho-Oh early into the anime series, which, in my theory, granted him eternal happiness, which explains why he never ages. Look it up. On July 20th, 2023, I was having some difficulty catching Raikou just because it's a roaming legendary and it kept running away from me. Eventually I caught Raikou and then I moved on to Ho-Oh. To catch Ho-Oh, you need all 3 legendary beasts in your party. This was a problem for me because I accidentally traded away some of the beasts into Pokemon Home or Crystal. But if you know how to John Hammond, like I did, it's rather easy to spawn some into your game so that you can activate the event. The last Pokemon I needed to catch was Celebi. Celebi is extremely easy to acquire in Crystal version, but like I said at the beginning, you'll have difficulties in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Celebi is an event-exclusive Pokemon in every single game except for Crystal, where you just encounter it straight up for free. It's a very, very easy in-game event to begin, so just look up a guide if you're experiencing issues. On July 20th, 2023, I completed Generation 2. We'll need to rewind a little bit in time, however, because if you know anything about Generation 2, you'll know there's a huge section that I skipped over. The unknown Pokemon are a pain in the Feraligatr. If you didn't know, there are 28 unknown Pokemon to catch, each representing a letter of the English alphabet, as well as the exclamation mark and the question mark. On July 16th, I discovered that the exclamation mark unknown and the question mark unknown are Heart Gold and Soul Silver exclusives. As you can see by my thoughts, I was slightly annoyed by that. You cannot acquire these 2 unknown forms in Gold, Silver, Crystal. You can only acquire them in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. I wish I had known that when starting this generation, but at least now, whoever's watching this video will have the heads up prior to starting. Not only do you need to catch these 2 unknown in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, you also need to have not traded your legendary beasts out of the game as well as the legendary birds. You just need like a bunch of legendaries in your party to get to the area where these 2 Pokemon spawn at. On top of that, I think you also need to collect every single one of the unknown forms just to make it to the room where these 2 spawn. It took me forever to catch these 2 because I had to play through the entirety of Soul Silver just to obtain 2 Pokemon. This is around the time in my journey where I started gaslighting myself by saying that they are technically Generation 3 Pokemon, mostly because I couldn't figure out how to John Hammond my way through obtaining them. Eventually I just caved in and played through all of Generation 2 all over again just to obtain 2 stinking punctuation mark Pokemon. Now that I've got that rant out of the way, let's go over the nicknames. If you didn't watch the first video, I'm a huge New York Rangers fan, so I like to reflect that by naming some Pokemon after the New York Rangers players that I grew fond of over the years. If you want to skip me talking about hockey, please skip to this time on screen. And for those of you that just like to hear me yap, I'm sorry for what you're about to go through. A is for Allison. I don't even remember what player that is, probably an old one. B is for Buchnevich. This is referencing Pavel Buchnevich, who was one of my favorite Rangers before we unfortunately traded him to the St. Louis Blues, I believe. So frustrating. C is for Filipedal. Shout out to you, Jake, if you're watching. That was his favorite player. But due to concussions and other injuries, we traded him to the Vancouver Canucks, where he suffered yet another head injury, and at this time is no longer playing hockey. Shout out to you, Filipedal. You did not deserve all the injuries. We love you. D is for Chris Drury, general manager of the New York Rangers. Not going to say anything about him right this second. E is for Phil Esposito. I don't have much to say about him. That's a little past my generation. F is for Adam Fox, who still plays for the New York Rangers, our defenseman. Love you, Adam Fox. G is for the greatest of all time, Wayne Gretzky. Shout out to the greatest hockey player that will ever live. H is for Kevin Hayes. I used to love watching Kevin Hayes, but we got rid of him, unfortunately. I is for Ingerfield. Some of these names I just Googled a Rangers player because I couldn't think of a New York Rangers player that started with I, so some of these are just going to be guys that I don't know. J is for Jaromir Jagr, obviously. Love you, Jagr. K is for... Oh no, man. Oh, no. This one hurts a lot. Christopher James Kreider was my favorite New York Ranger for a very long time. Unfortunately, this year, we traded him to the Anaheim Ducks. That breaks my heart. I'm really upset about that one. L is for Lundqvist, obviously. Henrik Lundqvist. We've gone over him 3 times in the last 2 videos. M is for the great Mark Messier. Shout out to my favorite GIF in the history of all GIFs. N is for Rick Nash. I used to love him, despite him not being able to shoot on target, but sure. O is for Brendan Othman. I believe he's still with the Rangers, but he's just too young. I don't think he's quite up to speed yet for the NHL. P is for Panarin. He's uncertain right now because of reasons. Q is for Jonathan Quick, the backup goalie for the Rangers. R is for Mike Richter, another great famous goalie. S is for Igor Shesterkin, 3 goalies in a row. He's our GOAT, current Rangers netminder. T is for Jacob Trouba. We went over him in the last video. U for Ulanov. I have no idea who that is. Picture of him on screen. V is for Jimmy Vesey. I used to love him, despite him not being super productive. He's no longer with the team. W is for Blake Wheeler. Shout out to another favorite GIF of mine. Unfortunately, no longer with the team. X is for X-NYR. This is a reference to when your team makes the playoffs. They put a little X next to your name to indicate that you made the playoffs. Y is for Keith Yandel. I used to watch him when I was younger, obviously very retired. Z, yes, I'm Canadian. Z is for Zibanejad, still New York Ranger, and I love him and his long, luscious hair. And that concludes the New York Rangers section of this video. If you're not a hockey fan, I'm so sorry for what I just put you through. Finally, the last 2 unknown, which I went over in great detail earlier. The question mark and the exclamation mark. I named these Y and UG for obvious reasons. I caught these 2 supposedly 8 days after completing Generation 2. Supposedly I marked down that I completed Generation 2, and then afterwards I realized probably not done. I should catch these guys, so I went back and I did it. And that concludes how I caught every single Pokemon in Generation 2 in Johto with my own trainer ID. Luckily, there were no event-exclusive Pokemon like the last generation, where it's near impossible to get one with your trainer ID. Looking at you, Mew. However, this will become a huge issue within the next few generations. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you have any questions on how I caught these Pokemon or need any advice, please feel free to let me know. I love discussing Pokemon. I would love to be a help if any of you are interested in trying this challenge. Wolf Duckworth's video will be in the description, and that's about it for me from this generation. I just want to say thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate you letting me have the opportunity to talk about something I'm very passionate about. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you found this video informative or entertaining. And I hope you all have a beauty fly day. Peace.